For decades, Melissa Gilbert was known to millions of television viewers simply as Laura Ingalls Wilder, the beloved half-pint from Little House on the Prairie. She became famous as a child, grew up in front of the cameras, survived the pressures of Hollywood, built a career beyond the show that made her famous, and eventually became a wife, mother, grandmother, and advocate. But today, when people search for the truth about Melissa Gilbert's husband, they are no longer asking only about the actor she married. They're asking about Timothy Busfield, the man who became her third husband, the circumstances that brought them together, the life they built, and the serious legal controversy that has now placed their marriage under an extraordinary public spotlight. The story is complicated because Timothy Busfield is not a newcomer to Hollywood. He has spent decades working as an actor, director, and producer. Audiences may recognize him from 30-something, Field of Dreams, The West Wing, and numerous other television and film projects. His career was substantial enough to exist independently of Melissa Gilbert's fame. When the two married in 2013, this was not simply a famous actress marrying an unknown private citizen. It was a union between two experienced entertainment professionals who had each already lived through previous marriages and long careers in the public eye. But to understand why their relationship attracted attention, it is necessary to go back before the controversy. Melissa Gilbert and Timothy Busfield had actually crossed paths long before they became husband and wife. Their connection was not a sudden meeting between two strangers. According to reports surrounding their engagement, their paths had crossed intermittently for many years. They eventually reconnected after Gilbert's marriage to Bruce Boxleitner had ended. That timing mattered. Gilbert had already experienced two marriages. Her first marriage to actor Bo Brinkman lasted from 1988 into the early 1990s, and they had a son, Dakota. She later married actor Bruce Boxleitner in 1995. That relationship lasted for 16 years, and they had a son, Michael. Gilbert and Boxleitner separated in 2011, with their divorce later finalized. CBS News. By the time Timothy Busfield entered the center of her personal life, Gilbert was not the young actress audiences remember from the 1970s. She was an adult woman who had experienced marriage, motherhood, divorce, career changes, and the unusual burden of growing up in the public eye. Busfield had his own complicated history. Before marrying Gilbert, he had also been married twice. He had children from those relationships as well. So when the two began a serious relationship, neither was entering it without history. In 2012, the relationship became more serious. The two reconnected, and what had once been a long-running acquaintance suddenly became something more. Gilbert later described the connection as almost immediate. She had become increasingly tired of the pressures of Los Angeles and the expectations attached to Hollywood. In an interview discussed by Us Weekly, she recalled Busfield telling her he was living in Michigan, and she responded that she wanted to go with him because she wanted a different way of living and wanted to age away from Hollywood's constant pressure. Us Weekly. Then came the engagement. In January 2013, representatives confirmed that Melissa Gilbert and Timothy Busfield were engaged. It was notable for another reason. This would be the third marriage for both of them. Reports at the time said the couple had known each other for years, and that their paths had crossed repeatedly before romance finally developed. CBS News. Just a few months later, on April 24th, 2013, they married at the San Isidro Ranch in Santa Barbara, California, in a private ceremony. Gilbert was 48 and Busfield was 55. CBS News. For years, their marriage appeared to be a quieter chapter in Gilbert's life. The couple eventually built a life that was deliberately different from a Hollywood environment in which both had spent so much of their careers. They lived in Michigan for several years and later moved to New York. In 2018, they purchased a cottage in the Catskill Mountains, describing plans to renovate it and make it their permanent home. Wikipedia. Their public descriptions of marriage were also remarkably ordinary. In 2025, Gilbert spoke about their relationship and described it as grounded in partnership, consideration, and mutual respect. She explained that they discussed decisions rather than making them independently and emphasized the comfort that came from functioning as a team. People.com. That image of a mature, comfortable marriage is important because it explains why the events of 2026 were so shocking. Suddenly, The question surrounding Melissa Gilbert's husband was no longer simply, who is Timothy Busfield? It became, what has happened to Timothy Busfield now? In January 2026, authorities in New Mexico issued an arrest warrant for Busfield following allegations involving child actors who had worked on the television series A Cleaning Lady. The allegations concerned incidents said to have occurred while Busfield was working on the production. He has denied the accusations and has consistently maintained that he did not commit the alleged acts. Us Weekly, the case then moved forward. In February 2026, a New Mexico grand jury indicted Busfield on 4 counts of criminal sexual contact with a child. Prosecutors said the charges arose from allegations concerning 2 young brothers who had worked on The Cleaning Lady. According to reporting by Reuters and the Associated Press, the allegations involved inappropriate touching and were said to have occurred during the period when Busfield worked on the series. Reuters. But there is an essential distinction that must not be lost in the headlines. An indictment is not a conviction. This distinction is especially important when discussing a case involving allegations as serious as these. The public may have opinions, but the legal system is designed to determine guilt or innocence through evidence and due process. Busfield's defense has disputed the accusations and argued that the case's weaknesses. His legal team has also offered explanations for the circumstances surrounding the allegations. Those claims are part of the defense position, not established facts. And that brings us to Melissa Gilbert. When the allegations became public, attention naturally turned toward the actress. People wanted to know whether she would remain beside her husband. They wanted to know what she knew. They wanted to know whether the allegations changed her opinion of the man she had married. Gilbert eventually addressed the situation publicly. In an April 2026 interview with Good Morning America, Gilbert described the experience as deeply traumatic and said she believed Busfield would be exonerated. She also addressed questions about whether she had known about previous allegations involving her husband before they married. ABC News. Her answer was significant. Gilbert said she had researched allegations from Busfield's past before marrying him. She said she discussed them with him and heard his side of the story. She maintained that she was neither naive nor complicit, and that she believed what he had told her. EW.com. That statement created another layer to the story. For some people, Gilbert's willingness to stand by her husband became a symbol of loyalty. For others, it raised uncomfortable questions about how someone can reconcile a long-term personal relationship with allegations of serious misconduct. But there is another point that must be remembered. Melissa Gilbert is not the person facing the criminal charges. The accusations are against Timothy Busfield. Gilbert's personal beliefs about her husband do not determine the outcome of the criminal case. That outcome must ultimately depend on the evidence presented through the legal process. And this is where the phrase "the truth" becomes difficult. There are actually several different truths being discussed at the same time. There is a documented truth about their relationship. Gilbert and Busfield married in 2013 after reconnecting years after their paths had first crossed. They built a life together, moved away from Los Angeles for periods of time, and publicly described their marriage as a partnership. Us Weekly. There's the legal truth that a grand jury indicted Busfield on 4 counts of criminal sexual contact with a child. He pleaded not guilty and has denied the accusations. Reuters. And there is the unresolved question of what ultimately happened during the incidents described in the allegations. That question cannot honestly be answered by a YouTube narrator, a headline, a social media comment, or a celebrity biography. It belongs to the evidence and the courts. This is also why some of the sensational claims circulating online should be treated carefully. Celebrity scandals generate rumors quickly, and rumors often become detached from the original facts. A responsible account should not transform an allegation into a conviction, and it should not transform a person's denial into proof of innocence either. The reality is more uncomfortable precisely because it remains unresolved. Melissa Gilbert's husband has a long professional history before this case. He was an established actor and director whose career included major television roles and films. He was not simply known because he married a former child star. His professional reputation was built over decades. At the same time, the current criminal allegations are now an undeniable part of his public story. And Gilbert's story has changed because of it. For most of her life, The public saw her through the lens of roles she played. Laura Ingalls Wilder became such an iconic character that it sometimes overshadowed the woman behind performance. Gilbert spent years trying to establish an identity beyond the child actress audiences remembered. Her marriage to Busfield seemed, for a time, to be part of that later chapter. A quieter life, a new home, family, work, and a relationship she described as deeply grounded. Now that private chapter has become public. Perhaps the most revealing part of their story is not the Hollywood glamour, but the contrast between the life they appear to be building and the extraordinary circumstances they now face. Before 2026, headlines about Gilbert and Busfield could focus on anniversaries, their homes, their careers, or Gilbert's memories of Little House on the Prairie. Their relationship was often presented as a later-in-life partnership between two people who had already learned from previous marriages. Today, the same marriage is being examined through the lens of a criminal case. That does not automatically rewrite everything that happened before. A relationship can contain years of genuine affection and still face an enormous crisis. A person can believe passionately in their spouse and still be unable to control what a court eventually determines. And a public figure's reputation can change dramatically even before a legal case reaches its conclusion. There's also a larger lesson here about celebrity culture. When a famous person's private life becomes a subject of criminal investigation, audiences often want a simple answer. They want someone to be the hero and someone else to be the villain. They want a definitive explanation immediately. Real life rarely provides that simplicity. The responsible approach is to separate what is known from what is alleged. What is known is that Melissa Gilbert and Timothy Busfield married in 2013. What is known is that both had previous marriages. What is known is that they have publicly described their relationship as a partnership built around mutual consideration and respect. What is known is that Busfield has been indicted in New Mexico on 4 counts of criminal sexual contact with a child. What is known is that he pleaded not guilty and denies the allegations. There's a strange moment that happens when a celebrity's private life suddenly becomes public again. For years, the public may believe it knows everything about that person. It knows the movies they made, the television shows they appeared in, the marriages they entered, the children they raised, and sometimes even the homes they purchased. But celebrity fame creates an illusion. The audience knows the public version of a person. The people closest to them know another version. And when those two versions suddenly collide, the consequences can be enormous. For Melissa Gilbert and Timothy Busfield, that collision came after more than a decade of marriage. When they married in 2013, neither of them was a newcomer to complicated relationships. Gilbert had already experienced 2 marriages. Busfield had also been married twice. Both had children. Both had spent decades in an industry where relationships are often examined under a microscope. Their decision to marry, therefore, represented something different from the kind of impulsive romance often associated with Hollywood. They were older. They had lived through disappointment. They knew what divorce felt like. They knew what it meant to raise children. And they knew that marriage required more than chemistry. In some ways, that history may have been one of the reasons their relationship worked for so long. Gilbert and Busfield did not need to build their identities from scratch. They had already become adults. They had already established careers. They had already experienced the strange mixture of privilege and pressure that comes with being recognizable. Instead of trying to create a glamorous Hollywood marriage, they appear to move toward a quieter life. That decision became particularly important for Gilbert. Her childhood had been anything but ordinary. She became famous before she was old enough to understand what fame really meant. Millions of people watched her grow up. Her face appeared on television screens across America. She became associated with one of the most beloved family dramas in television history. But childhood fame can become a strange prison. People continue to remember the child even after the child has disappeared. For Gilbert, growing older meant constantly negotiating between who the public thought she was and who she had actually become. Marriage became part of that evolution. With Busfield, she was not simply Laura Ingalls. She was Melissa, a woman with children, career ambitions, opinions, mistakes, hopes, and a life that existed beyond a television set. That is one reason their relationship was significant. It represented a later chapter in her life. And for years, That chapter appeared relatively peaceful. The couple moved away from Los Angeles. They embraced a different pace of life. They spent time in Michigan and later New York. They purchased a home in the Catskills. Gilbert spoke publicly about wanting a life that was less dominated by Hollywood. The physical distance from Los Angeles was symbolic. Hollywood had shaped both of their careers, but it did not have to control their future. They could wake up without photographers outside the house. They could spend time together without every dinner becoming a celebrity event. They could work when they wanted to work and retreat when they wanted privacy. For a couple who had spent decades in entertainment, that kind of ordinary life could have been extremely valuable. But the idea of privacy became almost impossible once the allegations against Busfield became public. Suddenly, the quiet life they had created was no longer quiet. News organizations began reporting the criminal case. Old stories were revisited. Gilbert's name appeared in headlines alongside her husband's. The public wanted explanations, and the couple's private decisions became material for public debate. This is where celebrity marriage becomes especially complicated. If an unknown person's spouse is accused of a crime, the spouse's personal reaction may remain private. If a famous actress's husband is accused, millions of strangers feel entitled to know what she thinks. They want statements. They want interviews. They want photographs. They want signs that confirm whatever conclusion they have already reached. Gilbert therefore found herself in a position that few people can truly understand. She had to deal with the emotional reality of the accusations while also watching her marriage become a public story. And she did something that many people found difficult to understand. She stayed beside Busfield. Gilbert publicly expressed her belief in her husband's innocence. She said she expected him to be exonerated. That statement did not end the controversy. It intensified it. Some people praised her loyalty. Others questioned her judgment. But there's another way to look at it. Gilbert was making a personal decision based on information and experiences that the public does not possess. The public knows headlines. Gilbert knows the man she married. Whether her assessment is ultimately proven right or wrong is a matter that cannot be determined simply by examining photographs or interviews. That is the uncomfortable reality. A marriage is not a courtroom, and a courtroom is not a marriage. The legal system asks whether the prosecution can prove criminal conduct according to the required standard. A spouse asks different questions. Who is this person? What have I experienced with them? What do I believe about their character? Those questions overlap, but they are not identical. This distinction becomes even more important because Gilbert has said that she was aware of allegations concerning Busfield's past before their marriage. According to her public comments, she did not simply discover everything in 2026. She had previously researched allegations, discussed them with Busfield, and made a decision based on those conversations. That detail changes the way the public can understand her position. It does not prove that Busfield is innocent. It does not prove that allegations are false. When a celebrity becomes involved in a serious legal controversy, the public often wants to know one thing immediately: what happens next? But in the case of Melissa Gilbert and Timothy Busfield, that question has several different answers. There is what happens next in the courtroom. There is what happens next to Busfield's career. There is what happens next to Gilbert's public image. And perhaps most importantly, there is what happens next inside their marriage. These questions are connected, but they are not the same. For Timothy Busfield, the legal case has transformed the way his decades-long career is being discussed. Before the allegations, his professional history could be described to the characters he played and the shows he directed. He had built a career that stretched across several decades. He worked during an era when television was changing dramatically. He appeared in 30-something, a series that became associated with a generation of American television. He later became known to another generation through The West Wing. He also appeared in films such as Field of Dreams, where he played a supporting role in one of the most remembered sports dramas of its era. But Busfield's career was not limited to acting. He became a director. That transition is significant because directing requires a different relationship with performers. An actor generally controls his own performance. A director is responsible for guiding an entire production that includes working with writers, actors, camera crews, editors, producers, and many other people. It is therefore understandable that the current allegations have attracted attention within the entertainment industry. The accusations involve conduct that prosecutors say occurred while Busfield was working on The Cleaning Lady. According to reporting on the case, the allegations involve child actors. Busfield has denied the accusations and pleaded not guilty. That means his legal position is clear. He is contesting the charges. But public perception operates differently from the legal system. For many people, simply seeing a celebrity's name connected with criminal charges can permanently change how they view that person. That is one reason criminal cases involving public figures can have consequences even before a verdict. The court may take months or longer to reach a conclusion. The internet takes seconds. A headline can travel around the world before the defendant has an opportunity to respond. A social media post can receive millions of views while containing only a fraction of the available information. And once an accusation becomes part of someone's digital history, it can be extremely difficult to separate the allegation from the person in the public imagination. Melissa Gilbert knows something about the power of public perception. Her entire childhood was shaped by it. She learned early that the audience could love a character while knowing almost nothing about the person who played her. That experience may have made her particularly aware of the difference between public image and private reality. Perhaps that is one reason she has spoken so firmly about her belief in Busfield. She is not simply responding to strangers. She is responding from the perspective of someone who has lived beside him. At the same time, there is an unavoidable contradiction. The public does not have access to everything Gilbert knows. And Gilbert does not have access to everything investigators know. That is exactly why a legal process exists. It allows claims to be tested. It allows evidence to be challenged. It allows witnesses to be questioned. It allows the defense to respond. And it ultimately gives a judge or jury the responsibility of deciding the case. This is a much slower process than the internet would prefer. But slow does not necessarily mean ineffective. In fact, when the consequences are enormous, taking time can be essential. There's also another question surrounding the case. How should the public treat the people involved? This is not simply a story about a celebrity. It involves allegations concerning children. That means sensationalizing the case can cause additional harm. The identities and privacy of young people involved in such matters deserve particular care. Turning their experiences into entertainment would be irresponsible. At the same time, reporting on allegations is not inherently wrong. The public has a legitimate interest in understanding serious criminal proceedings, especially when a well-known person is involved. The challenge is to report without exaggerating. That distinction separates journalism from gossip, and it also explains why the phrase "the truth" must be handled carefully. There is truth in the fact that an indictment exists. There is truth in the fact that Busfield denies the charges. There is truth in the fact that Gilbert supports him. But there is not yet a final legal truth about guilt or innocence until the case reaches its conclusion. This may disappoint audiences looking for a definitive ending, but reality does not always provide one immediately. While the legal case develops, Gilbert's personal story